Today, we're asking a simple but very difficult question. Should Christians watch rated R movies? What kind of entertainment is acceptable for a Christian? It's a difficult to navigate question, so let's get into it.
Should Christians watch rated R movies, Michael?
We are two young people in a media-saturated world, and
we
most
love
of it
movies.
is trash.
We love movies, though.
So how do you decide? Well, one, how do you decide what to watch?
No.
When most people ask that question, they just mean there's more content out there than one human person could consume in a lifetime.
Yeah.
I think it's almost like a lifetimes of content is produced every day.
Yeah, I think maybe more. Probably more, to be honest.
So
I mean, you got like 1 billion phones, like recording stuff. So how much of that is trash?
I mean, you also have like 10-hour edits of stupid stuff.
Hey.
But when we ask that question, how do you
Yeah.
know what to watch? What we're really asking is, should you watch things that are not Christian?
Morally.
Morally, yes.
Is it sin?
Is it a sin to watch a rated R movie?
Most of the time, I steer clear of rated R. I try to, but here's the thing. I am a movie buff, and my wife and I often get into a lot of conversations because I'll be like, oh, yeah, remember this old movie? You know, it's so good. Like, I want to show you it. And then she'll go, parental guidance. Goes right to it and then looks at, 5 hits for sexual content, 10 hits for language, this and this. And it's like, because I do believe it's probably not great to put tons of filth in your mind.
Yeah.
And obviously, it's bad to watch pornography. That's bad. I don't even know if we're allowed to say that on YouTube.
Or not.
We're not?
But here we go.
Maybe I'll bleep it out. It's bad to watch the nakies.
The nakies.
That's wrong.
Okay, so would it be wrong to look at a painting of somebody who is nude?
I don't know. Probably. I don't know. See, here's the thing. The old Puritans.
No, you're right. No, you're
The
right.
old Puritans had it real simple. You go to the movie theater, son, you're going to hell. Okay?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And so I actually think that's had a negative impact on Christian culture, in my opinion, because I am someone who is trying to use film and media to spread the gospel, spread a narrative, like we often talk about, that is God glorifying, that helps people understand, like, for instance, The Chosen helps people understand. I never have watched it just because I'm not interested in that particular piece of content.
You haven't watched any of it?
One episode at a watch party when the first season came out.
You should watch it.
So, but I do see its place. But with building our media ministry, we have seen a lot of perceptual, at least, pushback because of the understanding of how a movie could, or quote unquote entertainment could be for God.
Yeah. Okay, so I think this is probably where the difficulty lies for me. Legalism is really easy.
Yeah.
But even as a teenager, usually you can see through it. It's like you remember that? It was one of the X-Men movies where he's like, I think it might have been Deadpool or something, where they go up to Wolverine and they're like, Wolverine. And then he's like, F off. And they go, oh, that was my one F word for this movie, and you took it, you ruined it. It's like, okay, in a PG-13, the guidelines say you're allowed one F word.
Yeah.
And so it's like, so even as a teenager, you can see right through. It's like, don't go to rated R movies. It's like, oh, so I can hear one F word, but not
5.
Yeah, but not 5. Why? What?
Yeah.
Or like, I can see half of a naked, but not a full one.
Yeah.
Or I can know exactly what they're doing under those sheets, but I just can't see it. So you kind of...
Are you saying it's like arbitrary or...
Totally. Legalism is easy. Don't go to rated R movies. Easy. Boom,
Right.
no rated R movies. Or like no movies with a naked person. Easy.
Yeah.
But it's not.
But haven't the guidelines also changed over time? It's like a
Yeah,
rated R
bro.
movie back in the day was
Have
more
you
like
seen-
PG-13.
Have you seen not Raiders of the Lost Ark, the Temple of Doom?
Yeah.
I think Temple of Doom was made before they added the PG-13 rating. It's
Oh.
PG, and if you watch it, you're like, I couldn't even finish it. It was like, there's like a cult, human sacrifice.
It's like
and
scary.
It is scary. It is
But
bad.
it's PG.
But it's PG because they hadn't even added the PG-13 rating.
It's Indiana Jones. Come on now.
Anyway.
How could that be bad?
Yeah, well, yeah. So
what's the point of, like, why are we having this episode? Because we're not just here
because legalism is easy and license is easy.
Yeah.
Oh, Christians can do whatever they want. Like, it's okay to watch rated R movies. Like, it's not in the Bible, so it's not a sin.
Right.
And that's easy, but you also know it's wrong. You're like, I probably shouldn't be looking at that.
Isn't
Probably
that
shouldn't
kind
be
of
listening to
also legalism? Because you're just creating this arbitrary rule of like, well, it's not in the Bible. It's like, bleh. And that's
So
just
that's
like
the thing.
another thing you're
Any-
abiding by.
any arbitrary, when you just say all one way or all the other way, like drinking is fine. Like, well, there is a line though, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, never, ever, ever drink, not a single drop. It's like, the Bible doesn't say that. Come on.
That's why Jesus turned my wine into water.
So, like, legalism and license are easy. They're the easy way out, but you know that they're wrong.
Yeah.
When you really get into these hard, difficult questions and these like things where you really need to walk it out specifically in wisdom,
Yeah.
you know that a license answer or a legalism answer just doesn't cut it. And so we're trying to build the fence in and say, but it's not even build the fence in because it's not narrow. The answer has to be dynamic and broad and able to be nimble and answer different questions from different directions.
Well, one of the big things that I often run into is like, well, shouldn't a gang be represented as actual gangs are? Like in a movie, like if you're going to watch a movie and a gang is a part of the movie or, fill in the blank what thing you're talking about. Okay. It's going to be rated R if it's, this true, portrayal of this. Or I guess, in some sense you could have it to where you're, leaving out certain parts. I do appreciate movies that, this person's like getting murked or something, but you don't actually see it happen. Because I'm not a gore guy. I don't like seeing that stuff.
Yeah.
Now I did watch, but then on the other hand, you look at something like Hacksaw Ridge.
Yeah.
Which is like, I'm crying in that movie and I'm like feeling inspired to like go out and be a noble person that is self-sacrificial.
And the fear is a part of understanding what actually happened.
Well, yeah, and it's pretty gory. Like you see people get blown up and stuff. But that's how war was and is.
And you wouldn't understand that guy's mentality of service and love for his countrymen if you didn't know actually what he did.
Yeah.
I think of another. Have you ever seen? It's The Cross and the Switchblade, the movie Cross and the Switchblade.
I haven't seen the movie.
Okay, so the way that you were describing, if you're going to depict a gang, it's going to be nasty. So in The Cross and the Switchblade, David Wilkerson, who is played by Pat Boone, David Wilkerson wants to go to New York to minister to these gangs that are in New York in the. I think it's like 60s, 70s, 80s. Anyway, it's a really bad time in New York. Lots of crime, really bad. And he goes there to try to minister to them, and he goes to a gang house in the middle of one of their parties. And so you think like, oh, it's a Christian book. It's a Christian guy. It's supposed to inspire you to be a Christian. Everybody becomes Christians at the end. Like, it's a Christian movie. It's going to be cheesy. It's going to be fluff. It's going to be G-rated, whatever. No, he goes into this gang den and people are smoking. People are like up against a wall doing stuff. People pull out a knife on him. Like, it is scary and it is true. It's not fully depicted, but it is like it is supposed to give you an accurate, and people swear at him. In the Christian movie, there's cussing because people are swearing at him.
Okay, so let me make this point then. Like, so let's make this distinction because he actually experience this thing. David Wilkerson experienced
Oh yeah.
this atmosphere with these bad, sinful things going on that you wouldn't show a 10-year-old, let's say. You wouldn't show your kids. And so, but then, like, I guess the argument is, well, then why does someone have to view that happening? Like, I understand him going in there to preach the gospel, but you're not necessarily David Wilkerson going into that for that reason. So him going in to preach the gospel is somewhat justifying him being in a place. Like, if you were going to go preach the gospel at the bar versus watching a live stream of people at a bar, you know, kind of, there could be, I guess an argument would be there's a difference between the two. Like, why do you have to depict this in a film?
Yeah.
When
you don't have to. You could cookie cutter it and PG it.
But then we often hate on the Christian genre because it's always cheesy and no one likes the movies, really. Some people do, I guess.
I don't remember where I heard. I think it came from Tim Keller originally. But his point, there was some study done or something of a bunch of kids that had left the church in their late teens and early 20s. And far and away, the number one answer as to why those kids left the church is I don't know how they got this response, but this was how the story went with Tim Keller, is that the kids did not feel like their parents understood how the world really worked. Their friends knew how the world really worked. And their teachers and the TikTok star, wasn't TikTok back then, but, all these influencers and the celebrities and their friends and their teachers, they understood how the world really worked, what people were really like. And their parents had a fake cookie cutter version of what life was really like. A very toned down, Christianized, meek and mild version of the world.
And that's not what Christianity actually is.
Yeah, you just take this common thing where people go like, oh, I'm going to read the Bible. It's going to be nice and like full of nice sayings and cute things and maybe some laws, I guess. I heard that that's in there. And you open it up and it's like
death and destruction
God
and adultery.
told him to kill his son. And you're like, what the?
And then the flood of the earth. Yeah.
Yeah. And then it's like, this guy came home and he had to sacrifice his daughter because he promised God. It's like,
well, and then the man after God's own heart went and stole someone's wife and then got him murdered in battle because he was the king. And
totally.
Yeah.
And that throws people off. I mean, it throws them for a serious loop, and it keeps some people from the Bible, and it makes and I've even heard people make them feel superior. Like, that old book. Well, did you know what's really in that book? Yeah, I read it a couple
you
times.
hear that argument all the time on like campus debates with leftist people.
And on the one hand, you could say, oh, your religious text has bad things in it. But you can't have it both ways. You can't say like, well, the Christianity is fake and you just live in a made up world and it's like pretend and it's all just to pat yourself on the back and make you feel good about when you die. Like, no, the Bible, and say like the Bible is gross and weird and it has all this bad stuff in it. Actually, the Bible is trying to depict life as it really is, which includes sin.
Well, and that's the glorious thing about the Bible is it doesn't pull any punches. Therefore, like confirming, in my mind, one of the confirmations of its legitimacy is the fact that it tells it like it is. Like if you really want to convince people to follow, your religion, you don't put in the bad things.
Yeah, you make all your heroes the greatest guys in the story.
Yeah.
But the heroes are often the bad guys, just as often as they're the good guys.
Well, and that's why, you see it nowadays, even in Christian churches, is if a pastor or someone confesses what actually happened in their life, the sin that they committed, oftentimes they don't have a following anymore.
Yeah.
And for good reason, in a lot of cases, but
you can't take people as they really are. Christians want a cookie cutter version of their pastor just as much as they want a cookie cutter version of the Bible. I think ultimately the point about movies is a Christian movie is not necessarily one without any sin in it, because the Christian book has sin all over it.
Yeah.
It's like on every other page. So a Christian movie is not necessarily one that doesn't have any sin in it, but it is one that treats sin as it really is.
Right.
So, like, to go back to Crossing the Switchblade, you know who those guys are. You know what they're about. And at the end of the movie, they change. And you know who the hero is. You know who David Wilkerson is, and you know how he's going to act in that situation. And watching David Wilkerson act like this in that situation is part of the Christian heroism that movie is trying to depict.
Yeah.
And if you softened the blow of the kind of people he was around, you would actually detract from the story. If you tried to paint a PG cookie-cutter version of his time in New York, you actually would not be depicting the real thing, the real Christian thing of the heroism that he had to go through.
I definitely think there's ways that you can minimize the, negative portrayals of things in movies and still keep the legitimacy. Like, I'm thinking of a certain organization that released a film, and after it, we were just left kind of disgusted, and because they were trying to portray like first century Rome in its truest sense. Yeah. And I'm just like, okay, I see what you're trying to do, but what was the point? Like, it was just like, yeah, this is how it actually was. Look, look at the, the erotic plays and stuff. Yeah, it's weird. And it's like, okay, but I didn't receive anything out of it.
And that's probably part of it, is when I watch Crossing the Switchblade, I do receive something. You know what I mean? When I watch Gladiator, like, I'm inspired. Like, yeah, that's cool.
Okay,
That's heroism.
I think a place to take this would be like something the Lord showed me a while back, is that film can be thought of in the same way that you think of music, and it's very easy for us to understand like some music's good influence and some music's bad influence, but you wouldn't necessarily like put it as as high degree as some bad films. You'd be like, oh yeah, I never watched that. But like some songs, if you heard it in the store, it wouldn't be like the bad film being on or whatever. But you can, I feel like you can always tell what's in the heart of the creative through music specifically. And so
music is much better at that.
And so, but the same thing with film, I think, where you listen, we've brought up Drake before, but you listen to certain Drake songs, especially the ones that are aimed at said Kendrick Lamar, in recent times. I know this was, months ago now, but
you know what's going on in there.
Well, I would not recommend listening to it on a regular basis. I listen to it from simply a curiosity perspective, where I'm like, what is going on with this? This seems like a lot. I want to study what's happening in this cultural phenomenon with these two men that are like beefing and battle rapping with the largest stage that's ever existed in history. I'm like, this state of our world seems a little whack right now. And so I listened to quite a few of the diss tracks back and forth just to like out of curiosity. And I used to be a pretty big hip hop fan. But I will say that if you listen to something like that on a regular basis, it would probably turn your brain into mush.
Yeah.
And so there's that point as well. But then there's some secular artists where I would say like it's not necessarily wrong to listen to their songs, or there could be redemptive.
Their music is edifying.
There's definitely some.
Yeah.
And there's some bands, like, especially like I think of several 90s bands where you're like, is this about the Lord? You're like, you swear it's about the Lord, but then you look back at the origin, it's like may not have been about the Lord. But anyway, so I'm saying that the spirit in which something is made could play a role into. I know we're trying to figure out, is it okay to watch rated R movies as a Christian? Like, well, really, like, how do you choose what movies to watch? And,
so let's take a flip.
Yeah.
I want to bring it up the opposite side. Same thing about Oppenheimer.
Okay.
Cultural moment.
Yeah.
You want to peek your head in. You want to see what's going on.
Right.
And I was like, I was like, yeah, I mean, it's a huge deal.
It's
Like, I'm
Christopher
probably gonna go
Nolan.
see
Yeah.
it. Like, it's R. Yeah, I get it, but I'll probably go check it out. Until somebody told me there is a graphic sex scene,
No.
and when I heard that, I was just like, nah, I'm not gonna go see that. So the same deal is like, you're like, okay, it's a cultural moment. Like, you want to poke your head in, you want to see what's going on. Like, you do get a glimpse of what's happening in your culture.
Yeah.
And you shouldn't fill your mind with that. But I just decided, like, I don't even want to look at that once.
Right.
And so you know what I mean? And so even when you say the same thing about music, it's not the same thing.
So
Does that make sense?
My wife and I did go see Oppenheimer,
Okay.
and I hated it.
Okay.
I love Christopher Nolan. I did not like Oppenheimer, not because it was a bad movie from a theatrical perspective or from a filmmaking perspective or a directing perspective or producing or whatever, fill in the blank. I think it was excellent in those, and I think it portrayed, it seemed to portray from my, it's so weird with history because, the way they, portrayed the president and how he was like reckless and dropping the nukes. Maybe that's how it was, maybe how it wasn't, but it seemed like a way to, portray the history in a way that may or may not have happened. Also, I think that personally, I believe that there's a lot of demonic, and there was demonic influence with the creation of these nukes, and particularly with Oppenheimer. And I think that actually came through in the movie, and that's what was so disturbing about it, because we're just like, oh my gosh, this is. A buddy of mine said, well, it was a good portrayal of what evil was and of regret. But to me, it kind of painted Oppenheimer as not a bad guy at the end. It showed that he did something wrong, but it was like, yeah, but you should feel bad for Oppenheimer, Anyway, we came out of it not feeling pretty disturbed spiritually. And I don't know if that's just because we're extra sensitive to those things. We don't like scary movies, stuff like that. I don't really think any Christian, I think I can blanketly say, I don't think any Christian should be watching like horror movies. Like, I think that is where like it definitely crosses the line.
Perfect love casts out fear.
Yeah.
I'm not about that.
Yeah, I just think that is like blatantly like you're asking for it. You're asking for some demonic visitation or something. But we felt pretty similar about Oppenheimer. Now, that wasn't the same for our friend that enjoyed it, was fine with it, felt no conviction for it. And I think that's where you have to apply like in that circumstance, you have to apply something is sin. If you believe it's sin and you do it anyway, then it is sin to you.
Yeah.
And so some people, there's some circumstances when it comes to sin where it's circumstantial depending on the believer and depending on your level of faith per se.
Yeah. I mean, you're right. This would, because it's, you can't find in the Bible, thou shalt not go see rated R movies.
Yeah.
But you also know in your spirit, like, I can't be feeding my mind on this kind of stuff.
I know since then we decided to be a little bit more careful with those movies.
Just look up what's in it.
Yeah. And I knew that there was, but what and I was able to do it, but my wife was not able to time it right. But I basically didn't see any of the, because I knew when it was coming. Like, people told me, okay, when this scene comes up, look away. So that was good. So I was prepared for that point. For me, it was a filmmaking thing for me, which is why I wanted to see it, because it was on 70 millimeter, IMAX film.
Well, and that's kind of my point.
It was Christopher Nolan.
That's exactly my point. Is you go, I want to see this for secular reasons, and I know it's going to harm me spiritually. How much is it going to harm me spiritually? I know my mom, she would always say this. I'd be like, it only has some bad words in it. This is what she would always tell me. She would go, let's say I baked you a tray of brownies.
Oh, gosh.
And I said, oh, it's only got a little poop in it. She goes, how much of that tray of brownies would you eat? And, I'm trying to be a smart aleck at like 13. I'm like, I'd risk it, but trying to be a smart aleck.
Yeah.
But it's like, that's why it's tricky, and I think that there is an edifying way to portray violence, and there is, in like heroism and courage. And
that's why I think it goes back to the heart of the creator. Like, but also, I don't think you can harp on yourself that much, because sometimes you legitimately are like, clear conscience. You're like, I remember this movie was great. And then you put on this old movie that you loved in high school for your now wife or whoever, and you're like, let's turn this off.
Dude,
oh my god!
Or the people like your church buddies. You're like, yeah, come over. We're gonna watch a movie.
It's gonna be great.
It's gonna be so fun. Yeah, that one happened to me. That one definitely happened to me.
So, but what my point being is like, there's no, God doesn't want you to just crucify yourself, or shame yourself per se. He does want you to, pick up your cross, and every day. But he just shaming yourself is not going to help the situation. Like, for instance, I don't necessarily think it was a sin for us to go and see Oppenheimer, but now after seeing it, would I subject myself to that film again willingly, knowing how it affected me the first time? Probably not. Do I think it would necessarily be a sin if people were like, oh, we want to watch it, and then I was like, okay, and maybe it was the sex scenes or something were taken out? Maybe not, but that's where it's like nuance. But would I purposely watch that movie, go out to watch it again? No, probably not.
Yeah.
And you could say maybe that's sin at that point, because what you're expecting, kind of the effect it had on you spiritually afterwards.
Yeah.
I don't know.
There's a quote, I think it's from John Wesley, maybe. The quote goes, if you want to know what a culture is like, if you want to know what somebody loves, look at their entertainment. Because entertainment is the only thing that you spend money on that you do not need to survive. You do not need you need rent, you need a grocery bill, you need insurance to survive. You do not need Spotify or a Netflix subscription. So you tell me what entertainment you consume, what you willingly spend money on that you do not need to survive, and I will tell you what you love. And somebody else, Gavin Ortland, did a great video about entertainment and about loving entertainment. And he said the way that the church fathers viewed entertainment is they said, whatever you laugh at, whatever you enjoy, whatever you choose to consume for entertainment is catechizing you. You know what catechizing is? So the catechism is like, I ask a question, what is the nature of man? And then you have to memorize the answer. The supreme end of man is to glorify God and enjoy him forever. And so you memorize these answers, these religious answers by rote. That's called catechism.
It's like the Westminster Catechism.
Right. And so the way it works is you get taught religious dogma through memorization and repetition. And that is what you're doing. When you see unmarried people sleep together in sitcoms week after week after week after week after week after week.
It's normal for you.
You are catechizing yourself to think, oh yeah, when unmarried people sleep together, it's not a big deal. Or when you see same gender couples in a commercial. Well, commercial after commercial after commercial after commercial after commercial.
Honestly, I think even a bigger point than that, in which that we have been realizing being newlywed people, is that the way that movies have portrayed romance itself is off.
Has catechized you in a terrible, terrible way.
And it's really bad in subtle ways where you're like, oh yeah, obviously this is like amazing. This is how life is supposed to be. This person's supposed to fulfill me in every way. And it's just like,
They're supposed to be my soulmate every second of every day.
Yeah. And then,
spoiler alert, that's not how marriage actually goes.
Yeah. Yeah. And it just wraps you in this idea of like, it sets you up for disappointment, and for a lot of people, it sets them up for divorce.
Oh yeah, ultimately.
Because what's also portrayed so much is that there's no value in this covenantal agreement, because like sex can happen outside of marriage. It's like we're just getting married
Yeah.
for the heck of it. But once this person, because love is all about me feeling good,
Or our compatibility.
yeah, in the narrative of it, then once we're not compatible anymore, or you're not fulfilling my every desire, it's not this steamy, romantic thing.
Yeah.
Then what's wrong? Are we not soulmates anymore?
I remember I watched this romantic movie. It wasn't a romantic comedy. It was a romance movie. But the whole thing revolved around, it would have been a normal romance movie. Guy meets girl. They start to date. They like each other. There's problems. You know what I mean? But the problem was that the guy was married.
Mm.
I mean, and the whole thing was played out like his wife was a jerk. She was a terrible woman. She ended up divorcing him and taking all his money. And so he went to go be with the love of his life, and he was poor. But at the end of the movie, I was like, oh, that was a sweet romance. And then I thought for a second, and I was like, I just watched a romance about adultery.
Mm.
Like, that wasn't good.
Yeah.
What? And so I think most of what kind of entertainment you watch doesn't even have to do with what you watch so much as how you react to what you watch.
Yeah.
So you're the same thing with Oppenheimer. You went to go see Oppenheimer and you left and you said, I don't want to watch movies like that anymore.
Yeah.
I didn't like that and I don't want to watch that. And I think you pick the catechism that you want to enjoy, and you realize when that movie is telling you a message that does not line up with Scripture and does not line up with the discernment that the Spirit is giving you, and you say, I don't want to do any of that anymore. My wife and I, we watched all of Parks and Rec, and we liked that a lot, and so we watched Brooklyn Nine-Nine, which was made probably a decade later. It's kind of the same setup, but it was made a decade later. And I could tell how far sexual morals had slipped versus how much it played a prominence in the one show made 10 years ago, 20 years ago, and how much it played a prominence in the modern show.
Yeah.
And there came a point when I was like, every single storyline revolves around who is sleeping with who. And I just said, I'm done. I don't want to do this.
And it kind of became probably not as funny either.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. It was not as funny.
So to that point, I do think there's pretty clear things that, like, as a Christian, there's very obvious where anybody could look at a particular movie and be like, yeah, no Christian should watch that. Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, I think of like storylines like in Footloose, where it's this like Puritan, church town where it's like no dancing allowed.
Yeah.
None of the teenagers, you don't have your dance or whatever. And Kevin Bacon comes along and he's like, the young stud that's, the rebellious guy. But they, find the warehouse and then they're just dancing and free. And you're like, yeah, there's something right about, these kids like breaking the rules, and getting outside of this oppressive thing to just do something innocent as dance, And so, like, when we're thinking about this, it's so tempting to be like, well, there's so many bad movies. Let's just make movies bad and, like, put it in the categories of rated R. But then you see clearly how, like, then things that are actually helpful and good get kind of wrapped up into that in a similar way. If you think about, like, the storyline of Footloose, it's like, yeah, there's nothing wrong about dancing. But somehow that got wrapped in as one of the unforgivable sins because sometimes dancing is associated with
as a parent, I could flip it on its head and I could say, oh, it's a sweet, innocent movie. They're just like, it's nice and it's cool and it's fun. I'm like, okay, the entire story revolves around being rebellious to your parents and sneaking out.
Yeah, so I'm not saying that movie itself is like the perfect narrative of what.
Well, what I'm saying is like, okay, maybe there's no cussing, or maybe nobody dies, nobody gets murdered.
Oh,
you know what
okay.
I mean? Oh, it's fine, it's clean, except the entire message of the movie is, if you think your parents are stupid, disobey them.
Yeah.
That's a bad message.
Yeah. So then, but there is, on the other hand, what the other message of the movie is, and what I think so many people like align with is, or receive, and even me, which is like, you shouldn't restrict someone to just dance. It's like an amazing thing that God gave us. dancing.
And it requires wisdom. You got to
Yeah.
figure out actually what it is. And some people, I think, will receive different things than others. And that is where it kind of does become a matter of conscience of like, what is this movie saying to me? Is this movie tempting me to disobey my parents and think that they're stupid? I probably don't need to be catechized by that kind of information. Is this movie telling me like, hey, legalism is stupid and you shouldn't be so uptight about the things that God made that are good? That's great. Yeah. But it does depend on that movie is giving you a message. It's not just like, oh no, I saw somebody without their clothes on. Like the movie is telling you something.
Yeah.
Either about heroism or about about what is heroism. What do I think is heroic in the world?
Well, that's why like it could be okay for one person and not okay for another. Like someone that's a newer believer and that isn't as understanding of what they're about to get into with this film. Like for instance, we've talked about Dune a lot, and you would talk about how the main character in Dune is like a depiction of the Antichrist. Like
100%.
But he's the main character and kind of seen as the good guy, right?
Yep.
And so you could be receiving all these like ideas and think, oh, that's what a good guy is supposed to be like, but that's actually how Antichrist acts. But then someone like you could watch that film and be like, whoa, this is crazy that this is like something so many people are watching and digesting, and you see right through it, and it's not necessarily wrong for you to understand that film. So that's where I feel like in the narrative sense of it, sometimes you don't even know what to expect, and then you have to figure out what kind of person you are and your level of confidence with that stuff. Something that I want to bring up with this specifically, and I think a big deal breaker for a lot of people and a big issue for a lot of people, is the issue of sexual content within movies.
For me,
does that just ruin it?
I don't often, violence does not bother me very much.
Yeah. Or even cuss words.
Cuss words do kind of like grate on me.
Really?
Depending
what kind there are and how often it is, or like,
and like what situations.
Because I feel like in some movies where it's like an intense situation, right? Like talking about gang violence or something, or an action film, it's like this bad guy that's saying a bad word. It makes a lot of sense. But if the whole movie's this like raunchy, like just saying cussing and like, that's a whole nother thing for me where I'm like, I don't want any of that filth. But if it's in the right context,
it seems like there are some movies that try to depict how people actually talk, and I don't want to watch that. So violence, I have a pretty high threshold. Language, medium threshold. Sex, I have almost a zero threshold. I like no naked people. I don't want to do that. You know what I mean? And that is totally a personal, and part of that is like that kind of temptation is what I came out of to become a Christian. And so that particularly gets me, and that I can't do
So what's the threshold for that? Like if it's like full on nudity, or is it?
Yeah, I don't even want that. And even sometimes like if it goes too far with people like getting under the sheets, I'm like, can we move on? Like, I do not want to be a part of this.
Something like Fast and the Furious.
I've only seen one of those.
Have you seen the first one or no?
Nope. Oh, okay. But I like understand.
Like street racing, there's like skimpy girls out there. Is that something that you would completely avoid because of that part of it?
As pretty close. Depends how central to the film that would be. If that is a part of the movie, if that is a main part of the movie, if it's like a sideshow or if it's in the background, it would make me very uncomfortable.
Yeah. So if you looked up parental guidance and there's like one or two potentially risque.
Oh yeah, I look at parental guidance for everything.
And then you're just like, if there's like one or two potential something like Fast and Furious where there's like background people.
It's probably no.
Okay.
Also, I'm very picky about my time.
So, okay, then let me ask you this. As being a former campus minister, you were on campus a lot, and, these days people don't wear a lot of clothes around town.
Yep.
Is it just like for you that's just unavoidable, but you can avoid watching a movie with someone dressed in a similar way?
Totally.
Okay.
Yeah, that's definitely part of it. Is real like I have to go to the store, you know.
Yeah.
And I guess I don't have to go to the gym, but you know, yeah, that's just real life, you know. And I'm not gonna be a Muslim and make people dress in whatever. So that's just. But like when I'm just as much as I'm paying for a movie with my money, I'm paying for it with my time. That's 2 hours of my night that I could be reading, that I could be, you know, talking with my wife and having an important discussion and getting on the same page. I could be going to work out. I could be doing anything else in the whole entire world. And
Than
I've
watching some
chosen to
trash.
pay 2 hours of my time to sit and watch this movie. And it's not even the money that I get stingy about. It is really about the time that I get stingy about. And if I'm going to pay this movie time so that you can catechize me and feed me something, I'm going to be real picky about it.
Okay, so what about woke stuff?
Oh, it's just bad.
Yeah.
It's not like I want to stay away from it because it's going to...
Well, you were formerly a huge Marvel fanboy, right? Like you loved the Marvel,
I was into
but it kind of deteriorated.
Yeah,
and
but
everybody knows it. It's just it lost its grip, and
Yeah.
partially because of the multiverse thing, and partially just because the movies.
just because it's woke.
You think so?
Well, not because like depicting diversity on screen makes it worse. Do you know what I mean? And that's
Yeah.
like you didn't
Gotcha.
you didn't like Rings of Power because
It wasn't all white people.
yeah, no, that's stupid. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? It was not that. It was because it was bad. You know what I mean? But when you leave things that are true, and this is
Yeah.
the same thing that we were talking about, is like the message that it's actually telling you. It's not just the violence or just the language or just the drug use or just the sex. It is like, what are you doing with it? Who are you depicting as the hero in this story? How
those
are you
things are
depicting those things?
glorified.
Yeah, are those things glorified or are they condemned? Like,
Yeah.
how does the hero of the story interact with those things? And by truly depicting it, at least to a certain degree, you can increase the heroism of the hero by saying, look at the real temptation that he had to face, you know, or she had to face. When you don't believe in anything or any message other than be true to yourself, you're going to make junk.
Yeah.
And so that really is woke. There is no
good right.
you
or
think
wrong.
by putting on the mask you've played the part and you haven't even begun.
Yeah.
You know, and so that's
Well, that's the whole kind of conservative talking points right now is like, it's inclusivity at the expense of excellence.
well,
Right.
inclusivity for its own sake. There actually is no purpose, meaning, drive, message. The message just is, look, we put a person of color and a person with this sexual orientation on the screen. Aren't you happy? But there wasn't anything
Yeah.
in it. You weren't saying anything in that. So I don't steer away from woke stuff. I just steer away from because it's bad,
Yeah.
not because of any principled.
So Rotten Tomatoes, are you looking at the
Yep.
scores before you go?
Yep. I'm looking at the scores. I'm reading at least 2 or 3 reviews. I'm looking at the parental guidance. I am doing my due diligence before I pay the time.
You know, and we were in a really bad cycle for this for a while, several years ago. But isn't it interesting sometimes the divide between the critic ratings and the audience score?
I always pay attention to the audience score.
I mean, it's more accurate most of the time. But there's some times where it's like,
I pay more attention to the audience score. I actually read the critics' reviews.
what's really, I think, sounds my alarm bell is when the critics and the audience score is good. I'm like, what kind of deep, magic are they up to here? Because they've gotten deep in the psyche of people to, implant this
Or
narrative.
just nobody saw it. And so all the popular people,
Went to something else or something.
yeah, the mob stayed away
Yeah.
and didn't even bother to review it.
Yeah. There's like some where, like, for instance, Top Gun, amazing movie. I loved Top Gun.
Truly amazing.
I think it was great. I mean, because, Tom Cruise was like, it's unacceptable for me to make a bad movie because he's, he is Tom Cruise. And he knows the sauce. He knows what it takes for this, it's all about redemption, right? It's all about self-sacrifice. Like those are the
Heroism.
yeah.
Yeah. Like Mission Impossible, some of my favorite movies. I love Mission Impossible.
But I know people hated on Top Gun movie, and it's funny because it's one of the highest grossing movies of all time. After COVID. Top Gun Maverick.
How could you possibly? Anyway.
It's a white guy.
Oh yeah, that's probably why. Okay, ready? We're gonna end with this verse.
Okay.
Paul is, the writer of Hebrews is writing, and he's saying, you guys are not as mature as you ought to be. Everyone who lives on milk, if you're just a baby and you need milk, you are unskilled in the word of righteousness since you are a child. But solid food is for the mature, for those who have their powers of discernment trained by constant practice to distinguish good from evil. Solid food is for the mature, for those who have their powers of discernment trained by constant practice to distinguish good from evil. That's the kind of person I want to be. And to distinguish good from evil is not just a Holy Spirit download. He says, trained by constant practice to distinguish good from evil. So, decide how you're going to catechize yourself, with what kind of entertainment you're going to watch. There is good entertainment that can catechize you with actual Christian ideas. And so carefully filter. What am I taking in? How do I feel about what I'm taking in? And train yourself to distinguish what's good and what's bad. Don't just be a couch potato and, suck in 6 hours of Netflix at a time. Or TikTok, that would be worse, dear Lord.
Yeah. Yeah, the commies, man. Well, I had fun.
Yeah.
Any last words? Just that?
That was it. That was my last word.
All right. Pray for us. We need it.
Thank you, Lord. Thank God you are going to have to protect us in this world full of stuff that is trying to convince us to walk on the broad path. Lord, we want to be mature. And if that means going on a media detox, we will do it because we want to be able to distinguish good from evil, whether that means unplugging or thinking critically with a friend about what we just watched. Lord, we want to walk with you and think the way you think about everything that we see. And we trust you to lead us and guide us in that endeavor. Amen.
Amen.